Hi 1009, welcome to another module, another week. We're continuing on our discussion of biological information and growth, and this week we're going to be talking about inheritance. So last week we talked about cell cycles, we looked at the difference between mitosis and meiosis. This week we're going to be extending our understanding of meiosis to the actual process of inheritance. So meiosis generates the cells that communicate your genetic information to the next generation physically. If they take your DNA, or 50% of your DNA, and give it to your offspring, right? The other 50% comes from your other partner, and is that combination of genetic information that results in your offspring's genome. That communication of information is what we know as inheritance. And we'll be looking at first in chapter 15, sort of a simple model of inheritance. We'll be looking at how inheritance was discovered, really how genes were discovered through the experimentation of Gregor Mendel. Mendelian genetics is also known as simple genetics or simple inheritance. This is where we have one gene, two alleles, and we can easily predict the probability of a given offspring's genotype and phenotype by using a Punnett square. That's going to be what we discuss in chapter 15. You want to be able to relate that to the process of meiosis and how meiosis, the actual alignment of chromosomes during meiosis, leads to what we call the laws of inheritance. So that would be the law of segregation and the law of independent assortment. Where do those happen in meiosis, and what are they actually physically referring to? Make sure that you understand that from chapter 15. Chapter 16 then gets into more complex patterns of inheritance. There we're going to be learning about sex-linked chromosomes. We'll be looking at epigenetics. We'll be looking at linkage. So when you have two genes that occur on the same chromosome, how does it differ from two genes occurring on separate chromosomes, right? Crossing over, and then extranuclear inheritance. So inheritance of the mitochondria and chloroplast versus the inheritance of the rest of your genome. That's going to be the focus for this week. Like I said, we're starting with simple inheritance and then getting into these more complex patterns of inheritance and how do they influence or really dictate our ability to predict what we expect in the next generation. In essence, these chapters are really talking about our ability to predict patterns of inheritance, right? Or how can we, when we see a pattern of inheritance, can we infer whether or not it was a simple autosomal trait with one gene, two alleles, or was it a sex-linked trait, or did it have multiple alleles? How can we look at patterns of inheritance and then understand the mechanism of inheritance that underlies it? So that's what we're going to do this week. Otherwise, it's a pretty standard week. You have, you're reading 2 chapters. This material is a little challenging for students. Generally, traditionally, it is the most challenging subject in the class because not only are you trying to understand this process of meiosis, which I'm sure from last week you're familiar with how difficult it is, but then you're trying to layer in this process of genetic information being shuffled through meiosis and then being transmitted, and how all these external factors can influence that process, like epigenetic factors and whether or not it's on an X-link or X chromosome or not on an X chromosome. It gets a little complicated, and so I encourage you to kind of take maybe a little more visual approach to your note-taking. There's a process called mind mapping or concept mapping, where instead of just writing definitions down, you try to draw out the process or illustrate the process, and in that illustration include maybe some short definitions or linking terms to each other, like independent assortment and meiosis 1. How are those related? How would you illustrate that? As opposed to just writing text. Otherwise, yeah, reading, homework, quiz, and what did you learn? That's it for the week. And yeah, if you have any questions, reach out. We're happy to help. Don't feel like you're stuck if you get frustrated with this stuff. If you're stuck or you're frustrated, please contact us and we'll give you some additional resources to help you process this information.